You're tuned in to RX Radio.
A lot of people now that we've started talking about the blood work thing, I don't know if you noticed, but like it's just been like a pedal to the metal for everybody to get blood work now and start talking about blood work. So it is actually an issue because there's a number of different within the clientele that I work in, which ranges literally from people stepping on Olympia stage right down to people that have just had a heart transplant, for crying out loud. It's important to have these variables measured on a relatively regular basis, depending on what the issue is. But people are doing it now, and now they're starting to read into it, and I'm seeing it because people are actually getting independent blood labs done, paying online $300 or $400, getting a panel done, and then reading them kind of like a gas gauge, like a fuel gauge, where where it's not a fuel gauge. So a lot of times you gave like the idea, the whole thing of magnesium, for example, right? Like a lot of people will think if they get their magnesium measured that it's this gas gauge, and if their magnesium's down toward the low normal, or even if it's like mid to high normal, they want it to be like right at the far end or maybe even superseding the ranges. And one thing I educated all my clients on, and I'm trying to get out there in terms of these podcasts and whatnot in education, is that a lot of these measures are fixed variables for people. A lot of times they're variables that are controlled genetically and through diet. And then there's other times where just people it takes a lot more, say for example, vitamin D3 intake to get their 25 hydroxy vitamin D3 levels to something that would be on the high end of normal. So it's there's a couple things that come out of kind of a set of labs. One is that not every single measurement requires you to be at the top end. And two, when we have these labs, we can't overread into a number of the different variables, especially when they're in the normal range, because they literally will biologically fluctuate measurement to measurement.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing there is there's so many parallels that you can draw to training with blood labs. And I don't think anyone ever looks like how many guys I know where I ask them, like, man, what do you do for your calves? And they go, nothing. And I'm like, fuck. And it's like, the idea that we understand this idea of a fixed variable and had the genetic predisposition. And we saw this, I think this kind of broke into the nutrition space. At least it kind of came across my desk with the idea of cholesterol. Right? I think cholesterol was the first one to sort of at least widely in like the health and fitness and nutrition space, be understood as something that isn't just necessarily a dietary intake. It's not like a Cheerios is going to like save the day. It's really something that is more genetically mediated rather than something that you can directly affect, or at least long-term by intake. But the idea that, I love that gas gauge analogy, is really how they observe everything else that hasn't been brought to the forefront of their attention by like Dr. Oz or some guy in a YouTube video, is they do recognize, or people tend to recognize, that there are fixed variables like cholesterol, which probably has more to do with genetics, in some cases, and correct me if I'm wrong, than intake. Are there other like you get let's stick with like the health and fitness, bodybuilding, young trainer, coach, NPC level. What are the big things that you're looking for, or what are the things that you see most often that are maybe red flags or yellow flags or of concern, and maybe from a standpoint of these levels are usually way off, and then on the flip side of that, these interpretations are way off as far as like, oh, this is a gas gauge, let's fill up your magnesium or your vitamin D by supplementing or IV with these particular vitamins or minerals or whatever.
Yeah, actually the cholesterol one's a wonderful example, because there is kind of a Sherlock Holmes that you must do when you're talking about blood lipids that kind of preclude the genetic component. And then there's other aspects of looking at this blood lipid panel that kind of point to the direction that your blood lipids may be something that's genetically elevated or low, depending on what you're looking at in your family. So family history is really good. It's good to know where your parents sit, and it's good to know where their where their cardiovascular issues are, where their breast cancer issues are, where their prostate cancer issues are. All those things are nice to know where your parents sit, because that gives you a good idea of where you may be heading in a genetic way. Now, that's not there's a lot of environmental factors obviously in there. When we talk about cholesterol, this is a great example, because when we start to see elevated cholesterol levels, elevated cholesterol could be from a number of different things. So, for example, if you've got a high HDL, it's a very healthy thing. You may have an HDL that's up 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, 2 millimolar. And when you do that, that adds to your total cholesterol pool when they measure total cholesterol. So if your LDL cholesterol, or what we call the bad cholesterol, which it isn't bad, it's literally necessary, it just needs to be in balance. When your LDL cholesterol may seem elevated, you kind of have to look at it in the face of total cholesterol and HDL cholesterol. And what we want to see is that our total cholesterol to HDL cholesterol ratio is actually correct, rather than just looking at absolute numbers of everything. For example, total cholesterol, and then saying, well, cholesterol is elevated. Because when our LDL goes up, when our LDL goes up and we have our HDL go up, then our total cholesterol may be high, but the ratio of total cholesterol to our healthy HDL cholesterol is perfectly normal, which is actually kind of what we're interested in seeing. So there's been kind of a broken telephone thing that's gone on in the nutrition space about cholesterol, because, there's the camp that's like, oh my God, if you have high cholesterol, you're going to, die within a 5-year window of cardiovascular disease. And then there's the other side of the coin where people are saying, well, cholesterol doesn't mean anything. Drive it up. It's great for you because it makes your testosterone get higher. So in between there is an answer. And the answer is actually being able to, like I said, do this Sherlock Holmes evaluation of each of these components and look at them in the face of everything within that lipid panel. So to give you another example, the lipids are also really, really affected by blood glucose. So if we start seeing the lipids blood lipids get sideways, which is when you asked about what commonly I see, one of them is blood lipids. So the first thing I do is when I look at blood lipids, if I see total cholesterol high, then I look to see what components are making up that total cholesterol elevation. And then I also look at the triglycerides, which are also part of that panel, and see if they're elevated. If they're elevated and all the rest of the stuff's elevated and LDL is high and HDL is low, so we basically have a shitty panel, then I roll over to look at HbA1c, which is our long-term indicator of glucose regulation. And I look at fasting glucose levels. And if we see that those are elevated, then the first thing I attack is this pre-diabetic or insulin insensitivity that may be driving the issues with cholesterol. Now, you did also mention liver function and these kind of things, right? And this these effects that we see in athletes that train. So so now we're looking at, okay, so we have cholesterol, we have this dyslipidemia, or we have some sort of lipid imbalance, and we look over at the side of glucose and we go, well, glucose has been elevated, and that's likely why the triglycerides are elevated. But then we also have to look at what liver function is doing, because that's actually what's going to be integrating into this cholesterol or hypercholesterolemia that we're seeing if we're having issues with blood glucose and blood lipids. So that being said, we can be misled quite quickly if we don't read our blood panel properly, because when we look at our liver values, so I generally have athletes measure, and all my clients actually who train, measure ALT, AST, GGT, and CK. And those measurements, when we look at ALT and AST, those two enzymes can be elevated just naturally by a hard leg workout. CK can also, creatine kinase, can also be elevated by a heavy leg or back workout. And generally speaking, if you were to go into the hospital after a leg workout with chest pain, they'd see your CK levels raised and they say, well, you're having a heart attack. So when you think about it, what you have to do is you have to look at the liver and the lipids at first. And these are the things that I see out of whack every time in most of my athletes, especially if they're on PEDs, and understand whether or not this is driven by genetics, driven by diet, and or driven by some sort of liver dysregulation. And that's kind of the Fibonacci sequence, if you will, of elements to look at when we're talking about blood lipids. And that's been my biggest question, I think, on my socials for the last 6 months has been like about blood lipids, because most people's are out of whack when they're using androgens and eating a heavy saturated fat diet.
Now, does that also lend itself to being the most common misinterpretation? Like, a lot of people have taken it upon themselves who coach clients to go down this route, and likely from a standpoint of attempting to do due diligence, right? Attempting to be thorough, but obviously just going down that Sherlock Holmes and pulling on the thread and like, is it familial? Is it acquired? Is it Maybelline? Like, it gets so complicated so quickly that I think a lot of people without that background information might be in over their head. Is that liver axis familial dietary training Mayu? Is that where we also see the most common misinterpretations on the side of coaches, or is there something else that you see commonly going like, okay, coaches are getting this wrong? Not to say that they should be looking at blood labs, but I guess what is the most common mistake or oversimplification or overcomplication that you see on behalf of those interpreting blood labs, especially kind of in the health and fitness space?
Yeah, I don't think so the gas gauge analogy I gave is the biggest interpretation problem I see. And I don't see this in coaches so much, but I see this in people who come to me when they leave their coach and say, I need to get this fixed. And I start looking at their blood work and I'm like, you're as healthy as a horse. Like, this is amazing. I see it a lot in the hormones, because a lot of guys, they want to get on TRT and they don't get the answer they want from their doctor, because their testosterone's 5% lower than the high end, and so their doctor's not going to give them anything. LH is great, luteinizing hormone, so the boys are getting the signals to make the testosterone, and FSH is doing great, so the boys are getting the signal to make their sperm. So at the end of the day, nothing's going wrong there, but they just want to go on. They just want to be on the juice, right? So there's a lot of big mistakes on that gas gauge analogy when it comes to hormonal control. But kind of heading back into kind of this whole cholesterol issue, to kind of wrap that up in a nutshell. To be honest, I don't see it as interpretation errors so much. In fact, most coaches come to me when they just can't get it figured out. And it's driven by a couple of different things. So the first thing I do whenever I have someone come to me with severe dyslipidemia, so their blood lipids are out, cholesterol's high, LDL's way through the roof, HDL's in the tank, and maybe triglycerides are a little high. And what ends up happening is I actually take them off androgens. And this pisses off every single athlete I work with. And if I don't take them right off the androgens, I take them down to something that would be TRT, like true TRT, not bodybuilder TRT. So and it's funny the resistance I get to it, but what I do is I don't work with anyone until I get everything cleaned up, because to be honest, dysregulated physiology does not grow muscle. It's a stress. Your body doesn't want to grow anything from it. So I know there's a lot of big guys out there with a lot of dysregulation going on, but imagine how much bigger they'd be if they were healthy and their blood panels looked normal. And that's where we are with Antoine. And I don't know if you've been following his Olympia prep, but the dude is gaining weight. He's like 10 pounds heavier than he was at this point, and leaner than he was at this point for the Chicago Pro. So this is all an effect of now we got his body assimilating calories so well. His gut health's on point. Lipids are regulated beautifully. Blood sugar is bang on. And now his body is in a state to assimilate and incorporate those nutrients that he's eating, and combined with that really, really high level of protein synthesis he has going on with his natural genetics, obviously, as well as the PEDs he's using, which are relatively limited. And then we can start getting a synergistic effect of the diet, the training, and the drugs. So the drugs don't have to be really high, so we're not saturating receptors and just causing health issues. And the food that he intakes, which is a lot, gets used and put in the right places.
From a dietary perspective, because that's obviously such like an interesting use case, just if anyone's followed Antoine's story from where he started to where he is, and seen him in real life and watched him on stage over the course of this intervention, obviously I don't think it'll come as a surprise to most people that dysregulated lipids, for example, the majority of the intervention, not the majority, but an early starting point would be like, hey, let's tone down the fucking gear. But from like a dietary intervention standpoint, when we see lipids what is, maybe in this specific use case without giving too much away, or just in generally a prescription, what are the underlying dietary deficiencies or the dietary, you're consuming too much of something? What is the landscape coming in that usually causes that or adds gas to the fire of the drug use and the training and all that? And then what are your first action steps, if there is a general heuristic for it?
Yeah, this is the question. So, very interesting. So you'd asked me earlier kind of, what do I see coaches doing wrong? And it's not reading the blood work, to be honest. A lot, like most times, at least the coaches I work with, they're all great guys, and they know what they know and they know what they don't know. And they'll usually reach out to me, and, we get things sorted out pretty quick because they're really smart guys. But where we really run into trouble is with the religious aspects of bodybuilding. What I mean by that is the way the bro science has become kind of like the Bible and doesn't quite make sense. And so what happens is that we get, there's a lot of things that bodybuilders haven't done for years. And this doesn't mean every coach is doing this, by the way, but for the most part, the people who come to me, this has happened. Low fiber diets. And that's because fiber makes you bloated and gives you the big gut and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't the fiber causing those problems, guys. There's a lot of other things that were causing those problems. And so the first line of defense, give away my secret right now, is that I increase fat intake. If I see lipids out, I increase fat intake and I increase fiber intake severely.
No, fiber is a tricky one because anyone who travels a lot has probably found themselves cornered in a airport bathroom because you look at a Quest bar and you go, fucking brilliant. Look at me go. I'm going to tell Dwayne how much fiber I had today. Fiber has to have like a qualitative subdivision to it, right? Because like I'll consume just obscene amounts of fiber through, these artificially sweetened protein sources. And there's no way what I'm doing is healthy for me. Like give me like food sources or like maybe a little bit of background on fiber and its active mechanism in putting out this particular fire. But fiber on the whole, like it's got to be a case where not all fibers are considered equal, right? Because like, dude, 2 Quest bars, your boy's done.
Yeah,
done. I'm fucking like cancel my
that's
appointment.
Those polyols and that's those sugar alcohols that are giving you the distension and the gas and everything else and the slippery shits, if you will.
But why? And they are considered fibers, though, right? Like, how do they still have the positive effects? So there's no way there's a positive benit immediately.
Yeah. I mean, a Quest bar is just a compressed piece of chemical. But no offense to Quest, I mean, they made their $1 billion, right? So it's when they sold it. So, but the point is, so not all fibers created equal. What's really interesting about the fiber intake is it also, as soon as you start increasing it properly in your diet, which I'll get to in a second. You also increase your omega-3s and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So that also helps with the lipid dysregulation that we're talking about. So, yes, not fibers created equal. You don't want to get your fiber from Fiber One bars. You don't want to get your fiber from Quest bars or any sort of, for lack of a better term, food supplement, but rather get it from whole grains. So, and you can and there's a number of supplements out there that are made of whole grains, but you want to get it from grains. And so what's really interesting with grains is, they've been given a bad rap because of the fact that people can't tolerate them so well. So they end up with these, issues with their digestion and pooping and gas and constipation and you name it. You have to balance your soluble and your insoluble fibers. So your soluble fibers are going to be the ones when you put them in water, they expand and become like goopy, like if you're eating a chia seed. And your insoluble fibers are going to be like wheat and bran and all those kind of things that kind of go straight through and don't really do much other than create bulk for the stool. And so you want to have a mixture of both. You want to make sure you're getting at least 38 grams as a male and about 25 to 30 grams as a small female. If you're, getting into like male weight, as an athlete or whatnot, 170, 180 pounds, and you need to push it also up into that 38 to 40 gram range. But the idea behind the fiber thing is that it doesn't just, like, it's not just a thing that you eat and then it makes you shit well. There's a whole bunch of different benefits to having a high quality, high fiber diet. So if you've got a diet that's high in, things like flax, chia seeds, and hemp seeds, then you're also going to get the benefit of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are also going to help with your blood lipid dysregulation that you have in general, just as a food intake source. So when you get enough fiber in your diet, you will have better stools, obviously, and that cleans out the pipes better. But you also need to make sure you're assuring yourself that you're getting enough fluid intake so that when you have those soluble fibers and insoluble fibers in there, that you can move them through your system. So the benefit of a soluble fiber is that when it goes down in through the digestive tract and ends up into your large intestine or your colon, it ferments. And these fermentable fibers, and a lot of them are actually part of the group of FODMAPs, which people take out of their diet. These fermentable fibers increase short-chain fatty acid production in the gut, and that those short-chain fatty acids are the magic of gut health that allow us to regulate our lipids, regulate our hormones, and decrease inflammation. So it's really a synergistic effect that we're trying to achieve when we increase the fibers in our diet. But it's not, like I said, it's not a matter of just taking a bunch of supplemental fibers in order to get it, but rather getting them through food sources so you reap the benefits of the other stuff in there too.
Now, ingredients like, Jay and I lived in California. Jay still resides in California. I have, and it's a byproduct, a disdain for some of the people who reside in California. I have an aversion to the idea of like hemp and chia seeds and all this shit, just because it's just like a crunchy granola. Like, their shoes are made of hemp. They smoke a bunch of weed. There's hemp in their fucking. You know what gets me is the fucking the mason jar. Fuck your mason jar. But it's like, and these people are 120 pounds. And it's like, okay, I can understand from like a palliative perspective, like, okay, you've eaten chicken and rice for 7 meals a day for 20 years. You're going on a trend banger when you were 17. Now we're coming in, Dr. Wayne's coming in, just putting out fires with the hemp seeds and all that. Is it something that should be like a general health practice? Like this, we're obviously talking more in the fitness space with bodybuilders that are heavy into resistance training that will have altered markers just as a byproduct of that before we go throwing drugs in the mix. To the crunchy granola crowd out there, like what is like, there has to be like an upper limit, or it has to be relative, right? Like do you ascribe or prescribe things similar to, or what is the likelihood that someone might have offset lipids that would require this type of intervention if they're just like a guy who goes on hikes on weekends or whatever? Well,
here's the thing. This is the guy who goes on hikes probably doesn't have any problems with the lipids. He's going out and hiking all the time and doing all the things you're supposed to do. No, I'm kidding. So here's the point is that it's really easy to see if anybody's actually getting enough chia seeds and enough of that granola and California lifestyle in their diet by just simply analyzing how much fiber they're getting. So if you're trying to get all of your fiber, say for example from broccoli, which has a ton of fiber, then you're going to be eating a hell of a lot of broccoli, right? And when you eat, which bodybuilders do, right? We eat bags and bags of frozen broccoli and we throw it in the microwave real quick with our rice and our hamburger meat. And here's where the problem comes in, is that when you consistently eat the same fiber sources, like I mentioned earlier, you're not getting all the benefits from the other fiber sources that I've mentioned. And so the integrated physiology is something that not a lot of people understand. It went away with cellular and molecular physiology, and I was lucky to be old enough to be part of the integrated physiology education curriculum. So when you look at the whole system between the liver, gut axis, the gut-brain axis, the gut pancreas axis, the gut, you name it, axis, really all it comes down to is having variety in your diet. And having variety in your diet then allows your body to first get a variety of nutrients, and second, get a variety of different fibers, fats, and proteins and whatnot that actually either add or take away from your gut health. And or add or take away from your blood lipid and blood glucose health. But all of those things are integrated. These aren't things where we can just say, eat more fiber, like you said, and then the magic happens. There has to be variety, and that variety has to be relatively well chosen.
And so that's where I think the last part you added I find really interesting, like the well chosen part, because I feel like health is often attributed or at least correlated to variability in diet. And I draw so many correlations to training in this way, because I see people like, oh, I'm just going to do a bunch of shoulder health exercises. And it's like, well, fuck, 7 of them could be doing the same thing. 7 of them could be some sort of scapular specific drill, and you're not paying attention to T-spine or rib cage or glenohumeral joint or whatever. So I was literally just about to ask you, like, is a general prescription for health, at least as far as diet can curtail, variability in intake? But it sounds like there's a specificity in the required novelty. If that
100%,
lands.
yeah. So there's not an ebook that I can just throw at you and say, do this, and you're set.
Oh, you haven't seen my link in bio, friend.
So,
It's feet. It's all feet.
It's all feet. Yeah.
so yeah, no. So it's a great analogy actually. At least in my approach, when an athlete comes to me, I don't give like a canned approach to it, mainly because when we create a diet, we have any dietary programming, I teach us in my course. We start with protein, and everybody starts that way, right? We can clamp that one because we can get it out of the way. We can, 1 gram per pound body weight, we're good to go. We set that off to the side. And then it's a matter of playing with our glucose or our carbohydrates and our fat intake. And the thing is, when we start messing around with fibers, it's really neat because you actually increase carbohydrate intake, but it's, they don't count those carbs. Those carbs aren't going to change blood glucose except bring it down. And so we've got that kind of aspect, but we've also added in, like I said, when we get high quality fibers, we also bring with them high quality nutrition. And so in a lot of cases, right, we want to make sure that those fats get up so that we can start, taking advantage of the fiber and fat combination on blood glucose. So really it's not a matter of just, saying, here's where your macros are going to sit. These are the foods that you're going to choose from those macros, but rather coming up with a diet that we can actually modify to meet the needs of that athlete as we're paying attention to the blood work that's coming in. So with my pro athletes, that blood work's getting done every month. Now, there's not a lot of guys that have the opportunity to have that done. But for us, it makes a difference. And then, we're seeing big differences in the athletes that I'm working with this kind of monthly shifts. And we'll get to a point where there's actually a macro range that works quite well when we're considering fiber and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So really it's, the starting point for any diet that I work with is get it to, so we have a mixed diet. So like as close to 33% of each macro as possible. And the reason why I do that is because then over the next 8 weeks, I can monitor the athlete in terms of, sleep, their quality of training, their how they feel, like what their quality of their shits are, and overall, like how their head feels while they're in either a caloric deficit or a caloric surplus, depending on where we're at. Put all that together, and then you've got yourself kind of the perfect diet. But you have to be constantly monitoring.
Now, how much pushback, or maybe not pushback, but like one of the things that I find egregious with the current landscape around nutrition and social media is people's inability to pay attention to the feelings of their clients. Now, pro athletes are different, right? For the most part, pro athletes, like if I tell you, like, hey, you got to make weight and you're going to eat this, you go, okay, and you just eat it. Right. And it's very easy to get lost like in the science of, peer reviewed journals and all this, and without understanding like to the end user, especially most people listening to this that, you offer nutrition counseling as part of their services. It's very easy to listen to the talking heads in the nutrition space right now that are, and I don't want to pick on an individual, but are very like a data driven and not so keen about people's feelings, which is like, if compliance is the science, to kind of steal a Stan Efferdingism, then, you know, the real science-based approach would be having a flexible process, right? Like some people might have preferences toward, like, carb phobia is the thing that I see a lot. It's something that whenever I had to make weight, carbs, see you later. If you jettisoned 33% of your dietary or caloric intake, for the most part, you're going to lose weight. And for me, it was just like a simple way, as someone who's working 16 hours a day, to like not have to think, hey, I just don't make rice, sick. And then I just eat everything else. And for me, it made sense, and I always made weight. But it's like, where do you, or, you know, with your clientele, do you run into having to fit things that might fall out of like a perfect diet, but into what they deem necessary to lose weight, kind of in their own psychology?
Yeah, a little bit. Quite a bit. I try to get it so that we can meet 3/4 toward my direction and about 1/4 toward theirs, depending on how mucked up what they want is. So, for example, like if you're saying, like, you know, listen, I drink a dozen drinks on Saturday nights, so you're gonna have to fit that in. I look at them and I ask them, how serious are they? You know, how hard do they want to pay me, as much as they have to pay me per month to do this, right? So that stuff doesn't really stand with me. It just means that the person's actually not serious. They're looking for some sort of magic trick, and I'm not David Blaine, so I can't do the magic tricks. But in terms of on an individualized basis, absolutely, you have to take into account how many meals a day can the person handle. So that's the first thing that happens every time. Is I have most people who come to me that are 80 to 100 pounds overweight tend to report about 800 to 1,500 calories intake. Now we know that that's probably about half what they're eating, at least. So we have that problem, but we also have the issue of what's in their diet. So when we actually put together a diet that includes high quality, fruits, berries, different types of fibers, cereals, whatever we put into it, the bulk in that diet tends to actually, they can't get through it. And so for me, I like to give all my clients a massive diet to eat. Lots of meals, lots of calories, and then I can actually see what they truly can handle for real food. And it's amazing because most of my clients, I take them from what they've reported as a 1,500 calorie diet up to probably 26, 27, 2,800 calories, depending on how heavy they are. And they still have trouble actually intaking all the food. And that's strictly because I'm not only putting rice and meat on their plate. If you're only having rice and meat, the amount of bulk in that food is very, very little. Highly assimilated, if it's a chicken breast and white rice, the stuff is like digested like that. So we want things that slow down that gastric emptying. We want things like, vegetables with high fiber. We want to have, a side of berries if we have a bunch of, meat on the side, and we don't have a lot of a lot of vegetables. And all this stuff kind of integrates to make it so that the diet is more tolerable, because like I said, you've delayed that gastric emptying slightly so that the food stays around longer. And when we do that, we see less swings in hormonal stuff. So satiety hormones, we see them to be very, very high, and they drop very, very low because a lot of it has to do with that bulk in the digestive system. And so really at the end of the day, each person, when they come to you, is going to have a different challenge. It's going to be either I don't eat before 4 o'clock at night, and then I plow a bunch of food back. It might be that, I can't stop eating candy. It doesn't matter what it is. You have to be able to make it so it fits into their realm. And a lot of times by adding in bulky foods, they don't have the cravings for the things they're looking for. It's not as complicated as people think.
Yeah, it's just I find it such a disconnect, and probably in all aspects of health and fitness, I find the academia side and the coaching and the application side probably the most distant, because the talking heads of people who don't work with people, because you're one of the few academics that actually works with individuals. So I wanted to get your opinion on it, because so many people are in the lab looking at data and confidence intervals and P-scores and all this stuff, and they're not actually looking at people, and they're just, this is bullshit. this doesn't. Yeah, but it's like, dude, you don't work with people. Like, you don't know what it's like to not have optimal, reproducible lab conditions, and it's really difficult. And I feel like that's where bro science prevails. Like, bro science is just like the van that shows up and the kid goes, yeah, I guess I'll get in. Like, otherwise I'm walking because no one else cares. And I feel like the problem is on the side of the talking heads of academics, and because there's no compassion. Academia just seems so apathetic to
rigid.
the end user.
It's
and
rigid,
not that.
And you're right, 100%. And that's why I left academia to do what I do, because there is definitely an art to this science. And the art is literally understanding the client, understanding the human aspect of creating dietary programming. And this is probably where I see the biggest issue. Is you have the guys that are hyper science, and then you have the guys that are hyper bro. And it sucks because I'm sitting somewhere in the middle of that. And what happens generally is the people that are hyper bro science, they will get their bodies to where they want it to go, for sure, no doubt, because it's the science that worked, right? But the problem is when they get there, they're there and they can't stay there because they end up having these major issues with their labs, like the blood and urine labs, and then we have to kind of go back and rethink how we do things. That's what we had to do with Antoine. And so really, we have to, as academics, and me being an academic myself, we have to be able to assimilate information and then turn it into things that are digestible, right? And so one thing that we do know that the science says, and this is why I promote it from a scientific aspect, is that the Mediterranean diet is the diet of all diets, tested, tried, and true for cardiovascular issues, kidney issues, blood lipid issues, blood problems with insulin insensitivity. All these things seem to get better when we use a Mediterranean diet. Well, if we boil that down, like, what the hell is it? What is it about that Mediterranean diet that actually made it more healthy? It's not the fact that it's low protein, and I don't actually promote a low protein diet. I call it a high protein Mediterranean diet. And the reason why I say that is literally it's because the Mediterranean diet includes avocados, avocado oil, olives, olive oil, fibers, cereals, not Captain Crunch. But all these different aspects of it are what create the health of that diet. So if we just modify it and make it an athlete's diet, then we see athletes perform much better. And it's just strictly because, honestly, all we're doing is what our moms were trying to do back in the day, was give us a well-rounded, healthy diet. And the reason why people have got afraid of these carbohydrate sources and afraid of these cereals and whatnot is strictly because there's been such hype put on those aspects, that like negative hype, that people are mistaking processed cereal foods, processed grains, processed meats, processed oils, and just grouping them as oils, fruits, vegetables, and they're calling them one thing, but actually the processing is what has destroyed these wonderful foods that we've taken out of our diets. And if we get back to eating raw foods, incorporating those into those bodybuilding diets, which is all I'm doing, make it look a little more something like your mom would be proud of, then you end up with a lot more health, and your body gets better and better and better over time. Because, I mean, not to be cliche, but food is medicine, because it's a chronic thing. It goes in our mouth all day long. So that shit we feed ourselves with is what's going to be the end result of our health. And, if we're starting to load up on things that cause hyperinflammatory states like PEDs, and drinking alcohol and do all these other things, it becomes even more important to have that in there, but yet we take it out.
At scale, what do you think the most pervasive and harmful trends from either camp are? So, like, let's go bro science and then academia, because I feel like both are guilty of being hyperbolic. Both are guilty of being rigid in their own ways. In your experience, what are the practices sort of brought to the forefront by both of those camps that you're like, oh, I really wish that bodybuilders would stop saying X, Y, or Z about nutrition. I really wish academics would understand or stop saying 1, 2, 3 about nutrition.
Yeah. Okay. On the
Great answer. I feel like, you know what? That's probably the best answer. And knowing academics and bros on both sides. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I was that academic, running my, running a medical lab and, with 20 people working for me, but I was doing the bro thing on the side at my own house and had my own like other labs. So really, so been there, done that. It's funny though, because what's really cool about it is academics, the biggest problem with academics is because, and I'm going to really go on a limb here, and I'm going to talk about academics that are working in academia that have Stockholm syndrome and are afraid of like their jobs. Okay, so academics can only say what the data say, because if you say anything beyond that, you could be up for scrutiny. And that's one of the reasons why I left academia after 30 years being in it, is literally because you have a governing body, especially in medicine, that oversees everything you say. So you got to make sure there's a reference for everything you say, right? Well, all the science hasn't been fucking done. Like, here's the problem: is the bro science is actually what drives the real science, because bodybuilding, as a really best way to look at it, bodybuilding is literally a science on its own. It's a science run by the bros. And then when things start to work or don't work, that's when scientists go, hey, I'm going to take a look at this creatine stuff. People have been using it for a while. It seems like it's really doing something remarkable. And then they test it, it does. Now, they're still testing creatine. There's fucking like 9 billion studies that have basically proven everything up to brain health now in babies. So we're at a point now where like the data for creatine is great, but the data for dietary stuff in that bro science realm is very, very small. So here's where I see the biggest issue is that, if I was to come into the scene as an academic and say, I'm going to take on pro bodybuilder A, and I'm going to get him ready for the Olympia. If I used everything that was in the literature as to get your gut health on point, increase muscle protein synthesis, do all those things that we want to do to increase recovery and do that, the problem would be literally that the person would shit their pants the first day, just like you were talking about the Quest bars, because the digestive health of most of the people is not there. I mean, I ate the same diet from 19 till I was like 32 or 33. And it was rice, maybe some frozen peas, and 400 grams of meat. Like it was always like the same kind of mix, right? So if I just threw a bunch of fiber and a bunch of fats in there, I'd be having some pretty greasy stools, right? So the big disconnect is that when science says do this, the bros may try it, and we end up with people with gut distension and issues like that, as opposed to, breaking out and using some common sense to work with those athletes. So it's really it's really black or white, and the problem with the science guys is like, I have a fucking PhD, so therefore you're wrong, and that ain't the right way of going about it. And so that's kind of been the problem with trying to crack the code with getting guys like myself into the this world. Well, I've lived in this world more than I've lived in academia, to be honest. So I feel that I've kind of got the best of both worlds, where I can take from the science what I want, but really the science is just the science. It's hyper controlled and limited in scope.
Now, if the worst or the most pervasive idea or thought process out of academia is just an inability to meet people where they're at, and to the demand for that evidence, and where's your footnote citation on that? Like, where's your evidence? What's the worst practice that comes out of the other side, the bro science camp?
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's so easy to just pit the polar opposites at one another and be like, well, both of these.
Yeah. So the big problem in bro science is that we use the medal count as a metric for how well we did. So in other words, like, fuck, okay, so you got your IFBB pro at 24, and you're now 30, and you're 300 pounds, and you're going to go on stage at 280. But have we looked at any aspects of health whatsoever? Because you might have a remarkable athlete, but the guy's maybe dead by 40. So when we're talking about, sporting prowess and, making a mark in a sport, it's really how long can you do it for? It's like a rock star, right? Like, someone might come out with one hit and it's fucking awesome, but can they be the Rolling Stones? Right?
Yeah.
So that's where I see the biggest problem right now, is it's the win at all costs thing. I've done it. I mean, that's why I'm sitting with a kidney in my belly. But the win at all costs and the coach trying to utilize the client as a tool for how many pro cards they've won, or a tool for how many first places or overalls they've won, or in the world of lifting, making the best lifts in a day. The problem is, can you do it over and over and over again? And that's where the science and the bro science, where I'm trying to marry the two, so that we can have some great athletes, but they can live to tell their story when they're 60, 70 years old, comfortably, as opposed to from the grave. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it is such a marketing tool, eh? Like, you see the coaches, and they'll have that as like a stat line now.
Yeah, coaches can always get more athletes. They almost use them as disposable, especially in this space. You see a lot of turnover, switching back and forth between coaches, because they don't actually take care of their athletes. They just, like you said, Dwayne, they just use them as a vehicle for their own success.
Absolutely, and it's neat because when you look at a medal, like I've got 1,000 motocross trophies from my pro motocross years, right? And my wife actually made me fucking tear them all apart now, and they're just plaques. They took pictures. I'm really sad about it, but when you look at it, right, you have these, like, trophies are just bullshit that your wife wants to get rid of, right? And
I think they give them swords now. They give them a purple library card and a sword. Apparently that means something in bodybuilding. So you have quite the katana collection, exactly, or whatever.
Right? And so it's neat when you look back at those things, because it does for the athlete. It gives you really neat. It gives you some sort of, I guess, boner that you did all this stuff, right? But
maybe it depends on how many drugs you're taking.
Maybe not, right?
Yeah.
But when you look at it, from a coach's perspective, we have to be careful, because that's why I love where I'm at right now in my life. Is I actually, like, I don't care about how many first places my athletes can get, because they're going to get them because I'm making them better at what they do. It's no different than, like, you're trying to straighten up the finances around your house, and someone's trying to stop it from happening, and you're like, wait a minute, like, why are you mad at me every time I talk about finances, right? And it's like, well, I just don't like talking about finances. But it's really like, if you get your finances in order, everything's great. And the same with any athlete. If their health is in order first, then that's the thing they don't have to fucking worry about. But the problem is, a lot of times it's like, are my abs going to be tight enough, and will I have striated glutes? But what they're not realizing is, if you follow this method, you will, and it'll be easier, and you'll feel amazing when you're smiling on stage. It won't be a smile that's not real. And that's kind of like the philosophical way of looking at it. And where I'm at is actually trying to get those guys to that, healthy aspect, that they win shows, win competitions, win whatever it is they're trying to win at.
I think what Dwayne should put in his bio is the number of birthday candles, like how old, like how many years they've survived. Because it's like, it's a fucking graveyard out there, man. Like, the last couple of years, it's like Generation Iron's Instagram account, and we've talked about this before, has been a literal obituary, man. It's been really sad to see it. It's so funny, like you brought up, the idea that coaches use athletes. People are so quick to demonize, and it's funny to hear bodybuilders talk about this, like, in fight sports and the drama with the UFC and Dana White being this villain. I literally sat next to bodybuilders being like, yeah, no, it's really not fair how these athletes get treated, and the organization makes all the money. And then I look at them with their library card and their katana going, Are you fucking serious? Are you joking me? Really? Or like the NFL, like, yeah, it's a real shame. I'm like, you make $500 if you win a local show. At least Homeboy played for 4 years and made generational wealth. I just think it's almost like the lone wolf nature of the bodybuilder. It puts them outside of the realm of conventional sports and the problem that conventional sports has, even though I think they're as exploited in the industry from, whether it's a sponsorship or whether it's the team or the organization, IFBB, WBFF, even the natural federations. And this extends into all sports, right? How much the registration fees for all this shit. And it's just amazing how they don't see themselves as commoditized in the industry. And they just fall into any trap of a coach that is willing to be like, oh yeah, if I throw enough growth and primo and diazide at this guy, I can get another, I put him in like the Southern Indianapolis Classic where like some guy's fucking little brother is going to show up and he's going to win the class and the overall and win his fucking library card. And it's like, oh, that's another pro on the thing, but the guy's like not doing it in 2 years. Bodybuilders just need to wake the fuck up.
Well, you want to know what though, bud?
It's really sad
It's funny though how it works, right? Is because it goes both ways. Like I got to give a bit of kudos to the coaches too, because here's the thing, is bodybuilders will like also leave coaches and go to like other coaches that are known for like killing their clients. Because they want to win a show, right?
Widowmakers.
And I mean, years ago there was that question they asked Olympic athletes. I think it was before Seoul or whatever. You know, like if I could give you something to win a gold at this Olympics, but you're sure to die within a year, 5 years, whatever it is, right? Would you do it? They all it was like 100% unanimously said yes. And you know what? It's funny. I remember when that got asked, and I was like, fucking right, I would. You know. Now, like I just turned 50, right? Like, so it's not that far off. And now I'm like, holy fuck, I'm glad I didn't sell my soul on that one. Like, because really at the end of the day, like this life's long if you live it, right? Mm-hmm. But it's really, really fucking short if you live it too hard, right?
Can I ask you a question though? Is it, because I love, like you dance around the most interesting part of you, which I love, and I know it's, dude, there's a podcast where me and you are just gonna sit back and we're gonna rip like 3 grams, and me and Dwayne are gonna go to the moon, and we're gonna go there with a smile on our face, because I know you dance around like the happiness side, but the perspective is so interesting. Yeah. Like, is your perspective the fact that you're, you know, older now, or the fact that you've almost died?
Yeah,
which one gave you that perspective?
Well, they kind of coincided, right? To be honest, it's I've been around bodybuilding since, you know, I was 13 years old, and you know, I always wanted to be, you know, this big bodybuilder guy, and you know, I got there, and it was for me, it was always a really interesting it was an interesting thing to look back on my life once my kidneys failed, because I knew when they failed, and I actually made an announcement on my page for it. I'm like, okay, now they've failed. Now I got to tell people like what's going on, because now you're going to go back to being the small guy that you were. And so there's this like, and I think I talked about this before with you. It's like there's this halo that kind of, so you got, you know, young and old Dwayne, and then you got his life, right? And when you look at it, it's like, if you look at it as like growth, like size, and you know, getting chicks and all the things that you're trying to do by achieving these crazy feats of physiology, you'll see that actually my first show that I did, you know, I was a lightweight and I won it, and I was 154 pounds. Well, I'll tell you right now that if I was to do another show, which I never will, but I'd be 154 pounds. And that was when I was natural. So it's really kind of an interesting, the area under the curve of that is just a really bunch of fun fuckery. And that was it. And so if your goal is to get to 50, right, and then just drop off the face of the earth, you know, so that it doesn't go back, so your weight doesn't go down and all those, you don't age and all those kind of things, then hey, like go for it. But you will be dead like very, very soon after. So for me, yeah, that was the rude awakening, and the fact that I've lived through like the gnarliest times of bodybuilding in the 90s, and you know, had to make my own drugs in my kitchen and all that stuff because you couldn't buy them online, and you know, trying to pretend that buying a farm strictly because then if I have a farm, I can pretend I have animals, and then I can get the shit I need to make the stuff that I need to make to do my bodybuilding career. Like that shit's funny, right? Like, you know, you buy a hobby farm because you want to get some cows. So that, like, but that's the way you had to do it, right? So yeah, I've been there. I've, you know, and that's what I was actually telling a client the other day. I said, like, I've done everything. So, and it's not just bodybuilding wise, but everything. I was in university a long time, and university students are known for doing everything. So at the end of the day, really, it's a matter of taking the knowledge I've acquired, the mistakes I've made, and the successes I've had, which I've had lots of those, and putting all those together, and then just kind of saying, okay, so don't do that thing, and let's maximize these two things. So this athlete can like talk about his sport when he's 74 and be like, yeah, I met this Dr. Jackson guy, you know, and in Antoine's case, like, you know, I just came out of rehab and was told I had a heart condition and was told I'd never compete again. And now he's like, and you know, he went to Olympia within the same frickin' year. That would not have happened if we didn't apply science with the bro science and the longevity aspect to it. That is the 100% key to doing any sport.
You had me at hobby farm, but like I don't know. I think there's something to it though, like because there is a depth to you that I don't think a lot of people get to see, and I've been able to like see glimmers of it in glances.
About 6 hours of podcast that I've called you guys about an hour after and went, yeah, we can't fucking post that one.
Yeah, but it's just I know we get into the deep stuff, and it's a lot of fun. But I think like as good as you are, you're a great storyteller because you've lived a great story and you know the roles in the story and like how you've accepted your new role in the new story as like. The hell you're like bodybuilding Gandalf now. Like you're well shaven, heavily tattooed bodybuilding Gandalf. That's the wise character that helps the protagonist in the story now, which is so cool to see because it really usually just bifurcates two ways. It's like people just die or they go away. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, well, no, like that. If you've got to that point, it's like there's such a wisdom to pass on. So the fact that like your wisdom isn't just like coming in with a cocktail of like. This is the dry out stack, and it's like a bottle of Chianti and like 4 Lasix, and it's like Ronnie Coleman did this in the 80s. It's like, well, let's not go down that road. But you kind of take you take that collective wisdom under that arc as you kind of laid out, and you're like, dude, the Antoine thing was crazy to me. You watch the YouTube video, you hear about the calcium score. And then you see that like the show wins and like him showing up in I think it was Chicago where you end up getting the win. And you're like, what the fuck is this? And you're like, oh, he's Gandalf. He's definitely Gandalf. He's blowing fucking smoke rings and magic's happening. But it's just like the ability to synthesize all that, but even just pay that forward and instill that in people that you work with. Like, hey man, if you come out the other side of this, you know, and all good things are going to come to an end, but like that next chapter of these guys, they can start to pay this wisdom forward. And I think it's like, it's the beginning of a net shift in the industry that fuck, man, if they don't right the ship, this is not going to be a story that gets told. Like the way things were going up to a couple of years ago, just, you know, it was really sad times.
Yeah, the flywheel's still turning, and there's still people dropping off, and it's really neat. It's thanks for the Gandalf accolade. That's great. It's funny. It's so weird, eh? Like you just get old all of a sudden. Like it just fucking happens. Everybody. And the best part is it happens to everybody. So I can look at you guys and just be like, "It's coming, boys. Look out. You're gonna have kids. You're gonna do all these things, and all of a sudden you're gonna wake up one day and you're like, I'm fucking 48. You know what I mean? And you know, and what's really cool about Antoine's story to me is that, you know, I took a guy that literally, you know, mentally and physically was beaten down, and we, you know, him and I had we became really good friends over time because it was a lot of coaching at the beginning, like you know, convincing him that, you know, I have his best interest in mind and everything else. And all of a sudden now all we do is we just start doing things right, and he's fucking winning shows. And, you know, and he's putting on 10, 15 pounds of muscle between shows. And we're not talking a year between, right? So this shows you the capacity as an athlete that Antoine has. And if he had not met me, and this is where I will blow my horn, this chapter wouldn't be written, man. This chapter wouldn't get written. Right. So if you think about it, and Antoine will vouch for me on that. I mean, Fouad, I don't know if you watched the podcast with Fouad or not, with Antoine, but you got to watch it. Because Fouad was having so much trouble understanding this Team HD coaching aspect that we have now, where I'm coming in and intervening with the coaches so that we can get our athletes to the best possible health they can get to. And I'll tell you, Dorian Hamilton is just an amazing coach. And he's an amazing coach for opening the door to allowing me to come in and make changes. And we do. And that's why it works, is because he trusts the science. I don't overcomplicate the science, and Antoine is a machine. And as long as we have guys like that, man, it's just turn the crank, boys, and bring out champions, right?
Dude, I'm here for it. Best story in bodybuilding, best storyteller in bodybuilding. Dwayne Jackson, man, so stoked to have you on board with everything. So happy to have access to your insight, your wisdom. Can't wait to cross paths again. Hopefully see you in December at the Olympia. For those looking to reach out, especially on this topic, right, on the blood lipid stuff or the blood panel stuff, best way for people to get a hold of you?
So check out my Instagram. Shoot me a DM. It's at DRDN Jackson. That's Dr. Dwayne N. Jackson. And my new website should be up, I think, on Monday, maybe Tuesday. And that is www.drd yourvitalscience.com.
Easy days. We'll put it all up in the show
Awesome.
notes. Dr. Dwayne, pleasure
Appreciate it,
always,
Dwayne.
Always
man.
a pleasure, boys.
We'll see you soon.
Can't wait to see you guys.
Talk soon. Likewise.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.